Welcome to Carolina One Video Training Series. In this section, we'll be looking at the Agreement to Buy and Sell Residential Real Estate Due Diligence Addendum. Okay, as we look at the due diligence addendum, understand that this is the alternative that a buyer has if they choose not to go with a repair procedure. A couple of things just to note right out of the gate here. At the top, make sure to input all of the technical information from the contract to the due diligence addendum. And then here, you're going to have to determine how long of a due diligence period the buyer would like to have. A couple of things to note. First of all, this is a negotiable item and very likely will be negotiated between the seller and buyer as the contract is being presented and going back and forth. Also understand that it is business days that count. And so remember back to the beginning of your contract, or check back to page number 1 and look at that section where it defines days and business days for you, and that'll help you in this section, remembering that federal legal holidays do not count, weekends do not count, cannot include a Saturday or Sunday. So there's a lot of things from that first page of your agreement that you need to revisit. Big deal here to make sure that you get an accurate counting on when due diligence actually expires. Again, if a buyer misses a due diligence time period, then according to this addendum, the buyer does agree to move forward under an as-is sale. So very important that you know your due diligence deadline. In this section, again, to determine the number of business days, we typically see around 10. That generally gives the buyer about 2 weeks, 2 full weeks to do all that they need to do to determine if they're going to move forward with the purchase or not. Now, under the due diligence period, something else very important to note. During this period, these items here have to be completed. So during the due diligence window, the buyer can conduct all their inspections. Then they have to deliver the repair request to the seller, and during that time they have to negotiate all of those repairs. So they can either agree to move forward with the repairs being completed, or they can move forward under an amended contract, or they can move forward under an as-is contract, or if the seller refuses to do any repairs or not repairs sufficient for the buyer, then the buyer can terminate the contract by delivering a notice of termination and a fee, if there is one, to the seller. But here's the deal. All of those items have to be accomplished during the due diligence period. Once your due diligence deadline has passed, the buyer has waived all of their rights and agree to move forward under an as-is contract. So if you remember the repair procedure, the process starts with the date that was listed as the date for the home inspection. With the due diligence time period, the process begins the moment that there's a ratified contract. The next business day kicks off your due diligence time period, and you have until your designated number of days to do any and all your inspections, negotiate any and all repairs, and to determine whether or not we're going to move forward, or if the buyer's going to terminate. So a lot of things here, very, very important for you to keep track of those dates. Now, notice the language below. A couple of things just to keep in mind under termination. During the due diligence period, the buyer, now notice, may unilaterally terminate this contract. That means that they can terminate for any reason as long as they send over the notice of termination agreement. And if there's a fee, sometimes you'll see a fee being negotiated here. Sometimes you don't see a fee. It's $0. Really, it's a negotiable item between seller and buyer. But if the buyer wishes to terminate, then they need to deliver the notice to terminate before the due diligence period ends. And if there's a fee, that fee needs to accompany the notice to terminate. So one of the things we recommend that you consider is if a buyer is writing an offer with a due diligence addendum and there is a fee in this particular blank here, we encourage you to go ahead and have that buyer write a check for that fee made payable to the seller and place that in the folder so that if there is a need to terminate, you've already collected the termination fee. And of course, if there's not a need to terminate, you can return that strictly to the buyer. Again, moving through, just kind of noting some of the language here. One of the things to keep in mind is if the seller receives the delivered notice of termination and full fee during the period, then the earnest money is going to go back to the buyer. So just keep that in mind. So if the buyer does terminate according to the agreement, then they should receive full receipt of their earnest money. Last thing about due diligence: should the buyer fail to reach a new amended contract or terminate it? What's that mean? That means the buyer buys the property for the full purchase price as is. No repairs or anything will the seller do. So again, due diligence gives the buyer the opportunity to walk away for any reason whatsoever during the due diligence period. But it's important that the agent stay on top of the deadline and make sure that they facilitate all negotiations before that deadline period ends, as well as deliver any and all termination notices as well as fees if necessary before the deadline ends, because once the due diligence deadline passes, the buyer has waived their right to terminate based on due diligence. So there's a little bit about the due diligence addendum. It has some good things in there for the buyer, but also some things that you need to be aware of, particularly the dates and all the negotiations.